Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Roberts. I'm the resident dramaturg at the Indiana Repertory Theater. Thank you for joining us today for this pre-show chat for A Christmas Carol. I'm joined by our playwright-in-residence, James Still, who is also directing the carol this year for the first time. Welcome, James. We're so excited to have you directing the carol this year.
Thank you. I'm excited to be doing it.
We're going to start today by talking just a little bit about some of the history of the IRT production of A Christmas Carol. This adaptation is by Tom Haas, who was the IRT's artistic director from 1980 to 1991. And it actually started before he came to the IRT when he was artistic director at Playmakers Rep at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And it started as a class that he was teaching with some graduate students. He brought in the actor Frank Rader, who many of you will remember from many, many shows at the IRT in the 1980s. And they started with copies of the book in their hands, reading the book aloud, and editing it down into what could be a workable 2-hour stage production. So from the very beginning, this IRT script has been very, very closely aligned with the Dickens original, which, there are 200 or more theaters in America doing A Christmas Carol every season, and there are about 200 different adaptations of it. So we're very fond, we're very in love with our adaptation of the Carol that we've been doing for some 30 years now. And it's changed a little bit every year. The first year it was done at the IRT, there was one narrator and a group of then actors who played the different characters. The next year there was a group of 5 chimney sweeps who did the narration. The next year I think there was one narrator again, but this time it was Charles Dickens himself who was narrating the play. So there have been a lot of different changes from the beginning, little scenes that have been added and taken away, scenes that have sort of rotated through the years. We produced the play from 1980 to 1984. And then when Janet Allen became artistic director in 1996, we started producing it again, and we've done it every year except last year since then. And it's last year when the pandemic hit that we made some changes. We sat down and we thought, well, a cast of 16 during this health time is probably not going to work. So we thought, how small a cast can we make A Christmas Carol? And we decided on a group of 7. And Janet Allen, our artistic director, and Ben Hanna, the associate artistic director, and I spent some time a year and a half ago looking at the script, seeing how we could make it work with a smaller cast. We went back and reread the novel and found some things that we wanted to put back into the script that we had not had for a long time, or in many cases had never had. We took some things out of the script that we didn't think would work as well because of the casting. And then we ended up not being able to do the play last year just because of everything going on in the world. We just didn't feel that it was the right time for us to do this particular show. But we're very excited. We're doing it again this year. And we're very excited that we have a new director this year, James Still. James, I wanted to ask you, even before you came to the IRT, what is your lifelong relationship to A Christmas Carol?
I think probably I'm like a lot of people. It was I had read Charles Dickens pretty early as a young reader. I devoured the first Dickens I read was Oliver Twist. And then, of course, I'm of the age when the musical Oliver came out. I was familiar with that, which, is definitely rooted in Dickens, as we know. It departs in some ways. But then, I tore through David Copperfield and eventually found my way to Christmas Carol. Tale of Two Cities was another. That was probably the most important of the Dickens that I had read. So I knew him as a storyteller. I knew him as someone who was able to tell a complex story of multiple characters in a sort of epic style, and yet it felt very accessible to me, even as a young reader. I was just very engaged with that. So Christmas Carol was sort of part of a body of work that I was aware of, and Christmas Carol being probably the shortest of all the things that he read. Interestingly, I didn't start with that as a young reader, but found my way to it. And I think my enjoyment, or even my respect for Christmas Carol, only increased through the years, because when you think about a writer who he was not afraid of writing long novels with big casts, and yet Christmas Carol is, even though it is epic in terms of it being a ghost story, which means he goes, the story can go anywhere at any time, and that buys him a kind of cinematic structure before there was such a thing as cinematic structure, I guess you could say. But yeah, that's where I came in. And then, of course, starting at the IRT in 1998, I became, like many of our audience members, it was a holiday tradition for me. I saw it every year. I was always an outsider to it. As you said, I've never directed it. I don't think I've ever been in the rehearsal room with it, partly because it's a beast of a show to mount, and I don't think a room needed one more person like me with a lot of opinions in the room, and so I respected that and was an audience member. And so, yeah, my relationship to it through the years has sort of brought me to where we are now. Where we're doing the play and I'm directing it. So I will say it was not an ambition of mine. It wasn't like I came to the IRT and thought I need to direct a Christmas Carol. That it comes with so much wonderful history in terms of IRT history. It comes with so many directors and visions who have added their touches to the play, which just accumulate like magic, like fairy dust on this production in a certain way. And so knowing that you and Janet and Ben worked so hard to find a new version of this with a smaller cast, that was intriguing to me. The idea of telling big stories with a smaller cast, it requires a sort of theatrical approach that I love, both as an artist, as an audience member. So yeah, I feel like this is my date with Mr. Dickens. It's finally come. So it's a wonderful story to spend time with.
I know Janet has asked you more than once in the past if you were interested in directing the Carol, and you've said no then. What made you say yes this year?
Well, I think first, the reason I said no so often was I just really didn't think I had anything to bring to it. I mean, I feel like it was so beautifully realized and so personalized by the IRT that I guess I was happy just being an admirer from afar. And I think this year it's a couple of things. Honestly, Richard, it's one is, like many people who are listening and watching this, I suppose, the pandemic happened. I've spent a lot of time thinking deeply about my own values as a person and as an artist. What kind of stories do I want to tell right now? How am I going to spend my time? Those are big questions. So the context was different this time when Janet asked me, but I would say equally, it was the fact that this was, and you all had fashioned this new take on it with a smaller cast, which I knew was going to require a lot of invention. That to pull that off was going to require hard work, was going to require rigor and imagination, and that's why I direct. I want to be able to be that artist, that leader in that moment who can invite us into this experience. And I think, one of the things that we've talked about a lot in rehearsal is the historical record of this, the history of this is extremely useful. And I always want to know, well, how was it done in the past? The interesting thing is often it's almost impossible to do it exactly that way because of the nature of having 8 actors. I'll also say I haven't spent 1 second wishing I had more actors. It's not, I love doing it with these 8 actors. You can talk about why we got to 8 in a minute, maybe, from the 7 that you all had originally sort of fashioned this. But I think that definitely, all of that sort of created space for me to say yes. And so here I am.
And it's a terrific group of 8 actors. I just know from the readings and the table work we did, I'm so excited to see them doing it on their feet at some point soon. Let's talk about that 8th actor. We originally planned it for 7 actors, and we planned to do it without any children because at that time, a year and a half ago, we just didn't think that that was going to be safe for the child or for us. Now, a year and a half later, things are a little bit different. We have 1 young actor. All our actors are vaccinated, including that actor. So he had to be 12 years old or older to be able to be vaccinated. But now we have 8 actors. And that's largely because James came in and said, we cannot do this play without a child. Talk about that, James.
Yeah, well, again, I feel like it's really baked into the IRT version of this, that the child, and also because in a way, Scrooge's story, we go back to his childhood. The Christmas Past initially takes him back to his childhood. And there's something necessary about revisiting what is childlike in all of us in the holiday season. And I think for Scrooge, that's a big piece of the puzzle for him is revisiting that, not just the actual scenes from his childhood, but what it meant to be a child, what it meant to have imagination, what it meant to have books as company, which is something that he experiences when he goes back. So I just felt like the child present, our wonderful actors, could they play children? Of course they can. And in some ways they do in this. But I had a hunch, and it was only a hunch, that the addition of a child, a younger person in the cast, would bring out that spirit in the other actors as well, that sense of play, that sense of, again, of invention that's so necessary for this. So what's been interesting, Richard, about it is we didn't really know how that would work, all of us, right? We thought it was a good idea. And then, of course, we had to find that child. And it's a big thing. First of all, a young person who can be in a room with adults and feel comfortable, feel respected, feel like they have a voice in there. And man, oh man, did we ever get lucky, because our young actor, Quentin, is he's such a gift to our production. As I've said to the actors, we're not doing this play with 7 adults and 1 kid. We're doing this production with 8 actors. And he is right in the middle of everything. He's brought wonderful ideas to the story, his instincts. I always ask him, what's your feeling about this? Because often his thoughts about it open up possibilities for all of us. So I think it's been very inspiring to have a young person with us, especially in this time when I feel like the focus is on taking care of each other. There's a kind of kindness and newfound patience for all of us as we're trying to make theater in a different way in the time that we're living in. So it's been a wonderful, as I said, it's just been a gift.
Having directed the Carol in the past myself, I have some sense of what you're doing I always said it was like leaping in onto a train that was already barreling down the tracks, or leaping onto a ship that was sailing through the ocean. What do you feel like you've learned from the veterans in the show? There are 6 actors who've done it in the past, including Quentin, as well as a couple of new actors. But what do you feel like you've learned from them who've done it so many more times?
Oh gosh. Well, I rely on them. I am perfectly comfortable not being the smartest person in this room, not being the person with the most historical information. For one thing, I can't. There's no way to study that. All I can do is do my work on the story, on understanding, how to shepherd this story in with this adaptation. But oh gosh, I turn to the actors often. Because it's not just their knowledge about the production. They also have deep knowledge about the source material. They are very steeped in the Dickens novella and of A Christmas Carol. And so I've been moved and so grateful to sort of that great knowledge that they've brought to it. So that's one thing. I think on the flip side of that, again, because this is requiring a new kind of invention, they too don't, they're starting over in some ways. And I think they've appreciated that. I don't want to speak for them, but I know it's come up in rehearsal. It's just so great to think about this fresh again, that it requires that. But yeah, the knowledge that they brought has really, like I said, that inspires me. It's really interesting with the Carol, and I don't know what your experience was inside it, Richard, when you directed it. But I would say more than anything I've directed, this production, if I led with my ego, we would be in trouble, because I think you have to be very humble to do this production, but also to tell this story. It's a humbling story about redemption. And I think, in the room, it's like everyone is thinking about what's happening in the play and personalizing that in their own lives, about our own moments when we've been Scrooge-like, or we've been isolated, as we have been for 2 years in many ways, many of us. So that's been really interesting as well. But yeah, the ego thing is fascinating. And it's a tricky, always a tension, I think, as artists, because you have to have a certain amount of ego just to believe you can do this. But then you have to also know when to not let the ego be an obstacle to the process unfolding in the most open-hearted way possible. So that with this kind of work, it's so important to me that the actors have a sense of ownership, that they are creating this. I'm not telling them, it's not me like a puppet master telling them what to do or moving them here and there. This is so much built on their values and on their bodies, honestly, just how you move through space, all those things. So it's a very particular kind of experience, and one that, again, I couldn't have predicted. I mean, everything I'm saying to you right now, again, I thought, yeah, that's probably what it's going to be like, but that's a lot different from the actual experience day to day. And I'll say the other thing that's been here's a challenge and something beautiful that I hadn't really anticipated in a knowing way. Again, I understood intellectually, but because of the way the novella is written, as I said, as a ghost story, where with ghosts you can, in the blink of an eye or the turn of a lantern, you can suddenly be in a new place. And certainly Dickens took full advantage of that. It must have been very liberating for him to be able to just let the story take him where he will go. And what that means with our adaptation being so true to Dickens, it's also worth saying, almost all of the language is Dickens language. This is not a revisioning of that. This is very steeped in the Dickens.
And many of the things that are not from A Christmas Carol are from other Dickens novels.
Yeah, so it has, it really has that flavor. But I would say that because of the nature of that structure, I think, if we break it down by the way you all did the adaptation, there's, 37, 38 scenes. What I hadn't quite put together is every transition between those scenes is also a scene. So it's actually 75 scenes. So it's not like you do a scene and then you go, it's not a movie where cut, you film the next scene. You've got to somehow get to the next scene. And the nature of this means that we have to always be telling the story. So what's the story before the story, or what's the story that gets us to the next story? So that's been again, and I love that kind of theater. But it's challenging. That's a really challenging thing because you want to be inventive. You don't want to be lazy about that, but you also want to be generous to the audience, and so that they feel like they're being invited to follow us through this story. So that's been an interesting piece of my learning as well.
I want to talk a little bit about your work with our costume designer, Linda Pisano.
Mm-hmm.
2 years ago, the last time we did the Carol, we started what we anticipated would be a 3-year process of designing new costumes for the show. And Linda Pisano, who's the chair of the theater department at IU, was that designer. She's done many, many shows for us at the IRT. And then that got interrupted. And then we decided to do it with 8 people instead of 16, which kind of has a lot of implications in the costume world. So what has been your work together on this sort of renew?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing, as you point out. It's true with the scenery as well, which is, our production comes with that. And of course, I love Russell Matheny's, big, beautiful, vast snowfield, which is part of this year's production as well. He's done some tweaking of things, again, to accommodate 8 actors as opposed to 16. But it is, it will be very recognizable to audiences who've come to love being in that snowfield in our production. With Linda, with costumes, that's trickier because, when you have a larger cast, people can run off stage and be doing costume changes while other people are on stage, continuing to tell the story. We don't always have that option with a smaller cast. As you mentioned, there are many versions that you all have done in the past with different number of narrators, with Charles Dickens as a narrator. And we've stuck to a community of narrators who are sharing this story with the IRT audience. But that means sometimes, so that has to be very fluid in terms of who can be on stage, who doesn't have to be off stage to do something. So we really had to figure that out. And I would say our guide, we knew that the spirits, and I'm saying Marley's Ghost and then Christmas Past, Present, and Future, those, especially the 3 Past, Present, and Future, those were major cornerstones of Linda's redesign. And so we knew we wanted to preserve that. And so in a way, we had to work backwards. How can we get that particular actor off stage? Because that's a change that can't happen on stage. It's a pretty grand costume change. So that affected the adaptation that y'all did. That's affected things in rehearsal as well, where we've had to change some narration around in order to accommodate that. So that was a big thing. The other thing is, so for many of the changes, because all of the actors other than Scrooge play multiple roles in the story as needed, as the story demands. And so we really went simple for some of those. So now it's more about for some of those characters who may only appear one time, you throw in a scarf, you throw in a hat, you throw on a cape, and you become that character. But you do that in front of the audience. And I feel like that also feels very true to the adaptation, that we're being very transparent, that these are actors who are telling this story. And we're not trying that part of the storytelling. We're not trying to pretend that we're doing some, magical thing. It is magic to watch an actor become another character, no matter what they do. So I feel like that's the magic in the way that we're doing it. The other, as I said, simultaneously, there are these more transformative costume changes, which, is exciting. And I think the fact that it's the spirits who are really of another world, we're able to be true to that. So I think, yeah, I think Linda has had to be very nimble about this and very collaborative, which she is, of course. And we're still figuring that out, even in the room, like how to get certain things, where they might be, all those things. And that's, that can be frustrating work, but it's often, again, I just celebrate the opportunity to figure it out. That's how I approach these things. Is like, rather than it being something, rather than wishing it were something else, instead, it's just a given. That's another thing. I feel like we're working with all the givens. And as I said earlier, I've never spent time wishing we were doing this with a larger cast. The given is we're doing this with 8 actors. So the job, the challenge is, how do we do it? And that's what rehearsal is all about. It's sort of, I feel like you all in your original work on the adaptation, and then you and I, Richard, continue to work on the adaptation throughout the summer and before rehearsal. We were sort of creating the what, and in rehearsal, we're creating the how. And so figuring out the how is so much of what's happening in the room right now.
I love that kind of compression when you are trying to do something really big with a small group of actors.
Yeah.
That's such a creative challenge. One last question. We know that Charles Dickens was a performer as well as a writer. He spent much of his later years traveling around the world doing performances of A Christmas Carol. He had a one-man version of A Christmas Carol that he performed to great acclaim everywhere. You are a writer who has written plays that you have performed yourself. What do you think Charles Dickens would think of our version of A Christmas Carol?
It's funny you would ask that, because over the summer, especially as I was doing a lot of prep and a lot of meetings with you and with the designers, on my long daily walks, which became sort of part of the ritual for me during the pandemic, I would have these, others would say, imaginary conversations with Charles Dickens. They sure seemed real to me, but that's how I live. So I had my chats with Mr. Dickens, sort of seeking his blessings, if you were, knowing that I was gonna be in there spending time with his story. I suspect what we know about him and what we know about his first of all, he was a guy who needed to make money. He was supporting family, and early on he had not had a lot of success. Christmas Carol was a huge success as a novel, as a published novel for him. So it doesn't surprise me that he sort of took his own show on the road, if you will, because I don't know, there's something about, it was almost like celebrity, like he was a celebrity. And in a way, who better to hear the story from than Charles Dickens? Gosh, I wish I could have seen him do that. I'm sure it would have been very instructive, and I would have loved it. What do I think he would think about our production? Well, what I hope, and what I'll ask him again the next time I talk to him, is, I would hope that he would love the care that we've given the production, that we always go back to his words. In rehearsal, when we're stumped, everybody gets out a book, and tries to look it up. And it's like, well, what did Mr. Dickens say? How did he answer this question that we're asking, or what are the clues that he left us? So I feel like he might be really tickled by the care that we've brought to this. I think also, I have to believe he would love how theatrical it is. I think somebody who would go and do a one-man version of it, that's somebody then, who says to me that he's willing to take risks with something he could have just sold him, let the book continue to sell, but did this extra thing. And the last thing I guess I would say is that I feel like he would be pleased that we don't over sentimentalize his story, that we really try to be authentic about the darkness in the story, as well as the beautiful place where the story ends up, where Scrooge has this great heart-opening moment and pledges to live as a better human being in the days going forward. So I feel like we work awfully hard to be true to that, and I think that would matter to him. I think he would be very happy we have a child, a young person in the play. As you know, this was inspired by Dickens' outrage on what was happening with child labor and how children were really being used in London, in England at that time in the 1840s. So I feel like he would appreciate that. He would feel like we were also taking care of that part of his story. So yeah, I'll let you know the next time I talk to him.
And I know you talk to him frequently.
I do.
It's in the rehearsal reports.
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much, James. It's great talking to you. I'm so excited to see this new old Christmas Carol as it moves forward into the tech process and then putting it in front of audiences. November 26th through December 26th. You can come see Christmas Carol at the IRT. Thank you very much for joining us, James. And I look forward to seeing all of you later this season. Bye-bye.